It's an honor to be here tonight, alhamdulillah. And I do know that as Muslims, especially as Muslims, we're living in a society where the modern society, where science and the exposure of newer methodologies is a very prevalent part of our lives. And it's a wonderful thing. The fact that the tools of science have reached the level that they have today, at the level that we are able to even correlate, validate, and falsify any false notions in science, I think that's fantastic. It's really very encouraging. But I'd like us to understand that we have to understand what the definition of science is and how different is that with relations to how we see religion. Are these two irreconcilable entities? Are they two separate universes that cannot be reconciled? Is one under the other? What is it? So, because once you understand these definitions, once you understand the functions of these definitions, and once you understand the limitations of science, and once you understand where religion comes into play, the necessity of religion, what is the definition of religion? What is religion? When someone says, are you religious? Or do you have religion? Or do you follow a religion? Or when people say, I'm against religion, what do they mean by that? Okay, so it's extremely important. My suggestion to us all, if we want to strengthen our iman, there is a methodology by which you and I must follow in order to correlate conversations so we don't go into cyclical argumentative sessions. So first and foremost, define your terms. Even when you're talking to someone, ask them, what do you mean by this? What is your definition of this word? Can you please define it? Can you explain it to me further? If a person is articulate enough to be able to give you good definitions, though you and I may reject those definitions, it's a good starting point, because now you can adapt according to that definition answers. It's almost like a logical pathway, where a logical pathway requires a precondition which is called an assumption. Without assumptions, you cannot have logical pathways as a methodology. And once you have a fixed system, the logical mechanical system simply demands the variables to come in, and it will process and give you the number, just like in a function, mathematical function. There's a logical pathway, but what you feed into it can vary. The same with logical discussions about religion and God. It's got a pathway, and what you feed in it is going to give you a result. Many a times, people who discuss religion, who discuss God, who discuss methodologies, don't have an understanding of this logical methodology. They have not validated the equation. They have not validated the logical system. They have assumed it is legit. They have assumed it is right. And therefore, they start pumping the variables into it, which then starts giving them odd answers, which then leads them to make odd conclusions, which then leads them to make conclusions that in principle, if there was the truth of that issue, there would be astray. And it makes you wonder, how come I came across this wrong answer? Well, it's because you didn't process it properly. So please understand, brothers and sisters, in these conversations, as Muslims, even as non-Muslims, we must be very methodical in our method of approaching the truth. I don't care if it's about God and no God. It's about within Islam, between the schools of thought, which of the 5 major schools of thought is correct. Between Christians and Muslims, between Jews and Muslims, between Buddhists and Muslims, which one is right? How do I know which religion is right? I went through that phase, as I mentioned in my lectures a few nights ago, when I deconstructed my religion, because I was doubtful. I was not sure if Islam is the right religion. I needed validations. And I felt it's my responsibility and duty to understand it in my heart, because I don't want anybody preaching religion to me. I'm not interested. I do not want to be fooled, and I don't want anybody giving me fairy tales to scare me because I'm afraid of going to hell. I don't care. I want certainty, whatever it is. If you're going to tell me that's the way it is, and that's the name, and that's the brand, and I'm convinced that's the truth, then that's what I have to be. It's as simple as that. That's what I loved about science. When I went into science, I loved science because of its methodical approach to things. It was what we call emotive. There was no emotion involved in it. It was very methodical at the fundamental level. What makes religion so powerful, it has that component of emotions. It's got the component of faith. It's got the component of tawakkul, which science doesn't have. And as human beings, we can never be purist in methodical systems. Unless you lower yourself down to a robotic level, you're not a human being anymore. Emotions are an extremely powerful method of bonding and making things clearer. It's amazing. When you love someone and one tear comes out of your eye when you're traveling, that's louder than all the words you can say to a person about how much you love them. That one tear, because it says too much, right? That's an emotional state. Science cannot grapple that. But let me explain very briefly that there is a methodology, and I demanded that for myself because I did not want to be fooled. And I wanted to make sure that I was as unbiased as possible in my approach. So when people say to you, look, when you do a scientific analysis and methodical analysis, you need to be as unbiased as possible. I used to believe that yes, there is a way in which one can be totally non-biased. I came to the conclusion later on in my life that it's impossible to avoid a bias. It's impossible. Nobody can be free from a bias. It's impossible. So let's not fool ourselves in that. But we do try to limit the biases and control it so that at least our judgment is not skewed because of our biases. I hope I'm making sense now. Okay? So in that process, I started to question the integrity of my belief from God onwards because I knew fundamentally that all ideologies come from a central root. Just like when I study a cell, I'm always working at the nuclear level. As a person studying molecular science, what fascinated me about recombinant DNA was DNA is the root of life. It's the only molecule known to man that can replicate itself, and it's the template that decides how I'm going to be as a living being. And I love that. I say, I want to know this. I may not practice molecular science, but I want to know because my curiosity is there, because the incredible hand of God is working at that level where you have DNA polymerase replicating a copy, you see, making a copy of the original strand. This double helix system was fascinating to me, that how Allah in His infinite mercy has, contracted this very, very intricate, complicated formula and then completely contracted it into a very, very tight coil. And it's so functional, it's so elegant, and it's so secure, and it's so rapid. I said, wow, what is this? So as I'm studying science, every day I would come out and says, is it possible this can happen by chance? What is the probability? I'd ask the mathematicians. I'd go to math, my math professors, what's the probability? Tell me, crunch some numbers for me, please. How is that possible? There's too much order. I'm seeing way too much structure. That me, after spending, years studying this, and I'm watching it in the microscope, and you're seeing this thing happening in a millisecond. So that's it? That's all these years I studied? It's right there? Says, yeah, that's it. And I'm supposed to be a smart guy? All I did was I looked at it, and I broke it down, and I can tell you, and I can predict. Wow, what is this methodology? To me, it's intriguing. But still, the point is going to the nucleus level. Any conversation, always find the nucleus. If you ever study atomic science, nuclear science, you'll see it's all at the atomic level. You find subatomic level, quarks, whatever you go. Even if you go into quantum physics, you'll see there's always a center which spreads out and expresses itself. There's always a center to everything. Even the universe, if you study it, you'll see that the galaxies are moving around circles in disk shapes, and there's always a center. Allah says, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. These are signs for a community that thinks. So the more I got into it, the more I realized there is that core. So in my belief system, what is my core? I said, my core is a deity, because my origination has to have a precursor. And that precursor that made me in the universe must be at the center for causing who I am. Who is this one? Do you exist? Are you there? How come I can't see you? And how come you don't show yourself? And why are you so great that I can't see you? Couldn't you be great and I could see you? So these were questions I always asked myself, all the time. And the more I delved into it in a methodical way, I began to realize, wow, what a foolish question to see God. That I have seen God enough by looking at His creation. Now you might say, oh, that's a leap of faith. No, it's not. Because in my scientific world, I remember we used to come up with all kinds of conjectural arguments. Let's, for example, to give you a quick analysis. You see, for example, people like Stephen Hawking, who's written a book called Brief History of Time. And he's written many books, by the way. He's even done a whole series called The Elegant Universe. Where when you study, he talks, in fact, he was one of the proponents who suggested the idea of black holes. And when they studied the density of the universe, they noticed that the universe is far denser than what was visible. And they could not reconcile mathematically that huge discrepancy in the numbers with regards to the density of the universe compared to what was visibly and measurable. And they knew there was some kind of dark matter out there that could not be visibly seen and that light could not penetrate it. And they called it the dark hole, the black hole they call it, which light cannot penetrate through. And it's infinitely dense, they call it infinitely hot. And they called it a singularity. A singularity is that point of origination where mass is so dense, it's the ultimate, basically. So the more I studied this, the more I realized, I said, Hawking has reached this conclusion without seeing this dark matter. Is that acceptable in science? Because if science is so tangible and everything is measurable, can I measure something by negating something? Can I conclude the existence of something by rejecting something? In other words, can I derive scientific understanding without having to tangibly see something, but I see the effect of that thing that's hidden through that which is seen? Can I do that? And I said, we do. In fact, if you study string theories, in string theories, you have this 11th dimension, 12th dimension. Michio Kaku, for example, is a Japanese physicist. There are many out there who talk about string theories and superstring theories. They're talking about dimensions that no science in the world today can experiment. It cannot be experimented. It can be derived indirectly, and we can try to see the effects, just like we cannot see electrons around a proton. We can't see it, but we know it's there. So we're deriving so many things that I started to understand. I said, wow, even in the world of science, if I really want to get up into the purest of the forms of sciences, it's all derivations. It's all with a clear understanding that once I see the foundations, I can now talk about entities that you can never tangibly touch, but that are so real in my life, they're just as real as the tangible. And the more I went into that, the more I came to the conclusion, that's science. He says, yes. I said, then why am I rejected into believing about a deity that I cannot measure? For I can derive it. Even Richard Carrier called me, he says, Rajab Ali believes in evidential presuppositionalism. It's a heavy word. Rajab Ali believes in evidential presuppositionalism. I chuckled, I said, Richard, that's what science is all about. It is evidential presuppositionalism. We're scientists, that's what it's all about. I see and therefore I presuppose. Hello? You're just putting some fancy words around this thing to confuse mankind, to create some kind of a smoke screen. But let's face it, which scientist is not an evidential presuppositionalist? For at the end of the day, it's the evidence that I presuppose. How do I get into a laboratory without presuppositions? So look how they try to weave these words to try to confuse me. And I said, what? I exist. I'm questioning my system. I'm looking around that is it possible this grand spectacular system can come out of pure chance? Can pure chance control order? Can totality of disorder bring about order? These are absurd statements in science. Absurd. That when you look at chance and probabilities, it is completely controlled within a control system. There is no such thing as totality of chance outside of a control system. It's inconceivable. It's like saying there was so much randomness, it suddenly formed a computer which formed an operating system which became Microsoft Windows. That's absurd. Absurd. Now imagine trying to project these kinds of postulates forward in science. People think you're crazy. So I said, wait a minute, there's a root here that as much as there are chances and probabilities of things can happen, and probabilities are there, and Allah has allowed me in this spectacular universe to counter every coin with a counter coin, which is what life is so beautiful about. But no one ever said that there is never an argument for something, for there's no consistency to something. Because if there was no consistency to anything, then science should not exist. Because science needs to stand on a consistent foundation too, for it to project any solutions and any answers. And the more I got into it, the more I realized, wait a minute, I'm being duped into this what we call rhetorical talk. It's rhetoric. It's all rhetoric, you get it? It's not real, it's rhetoric. It's just made up stories to confuse us. And I challenged it at my university. I used to sit with my professors and challenge, what do you mean by this word? Well, you're violating science. You say nature decides. I said, how does it decide? Is it intelligent? What do you mean by it taking this position and not that position? Why is evolution so progressive? Oh, because if it wasn't, it would cease to exist. Why is the necessity to exist so important? Well, that's just the way it works. I said, well, have you wondered why is the way it works? Or are we supposed to just throw our hands in the air and say, well, that's it? So in other words, if you tell me that don't lie, and I say, why not? You say, well, that's the way it works. And that's it? That's my answer? In other words, I should be so myopic in all my movements, my ethical movements should just be a nose, strike away, that's it? Nothing long-term that I should worry about? I said, well, you may have an argument, but to me, that's a very foolish, childish argument. I'm not willing to accept that as a human being. I think we're far too intelligent for such conversations. And the more I went into it, the more I started looking. So now let me just conclude on this real fast before we go to the Q&A session. So what about evolution? Was Adam evolved? Because this is a classic question we have. Because we've got what we call the neo-Darwinian theories of evolution. As you know, Darwin was a believer in God and the origin of species that he wrote about. There were so many conjectures. If you study them, there were over 270 hypothetical ifs in his theory. If this was, this would be. If this is, this would be. This was how Darwin was originally presenting the Darwinian theories. Now, what Darwin brought when he observed the finches and, in the Galapagos Islands and so on, it's a very valid question. Did we evolve? And I think scientifically, it's a very valid question. It should be asked that way. Because science, by definition, is a methodology to understand the reality based on the system, and I'm going to repeat it, based on the system of cause and effect. Science is an observation based on a system of cause and effect. That's it. It's that simple. Everything we study in science is either an effect and we study the cause, or we understand the cause and we create the effect. That's what science is about. It's a methodology. That's it. And we try to purify the methodology such that we know when to create the effect, when we want it, because we know how it works. Just like when a guy builds an aircraft, there are 1,000 ways to put an aircraft, but when that 747 is going to carry 300-400 people, it's most probably going to reach its destination because the ones who built it tested all the possibilities and made sure any potential danger to that flight was removed from its parameters, which then increased the safety record of the aircraft. You agree? It's a methodology. It's a scientific approach. That's all it's about. So it's a system of cause and effect. And in science, in a pure form of science, I am an effect. What caused me? Did I come from a predecessor? I do know I have parents. Did my parents have parents who had parents who had parents? But who were those parents that came? That's the question. So in science, to go backward in this methodology and therefore to use this term evolution is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. Micro or macro, when we look at all the levels of evolution, all of them have some credibility to it and they are a necessary part of science. So let's not collectively, holistically take this whole thing and throw it out the window. It says, no, this has nothing to do with me because I'm a Muslim. This is not proper approach to science. Proper approach to science is to say, I see the term, I recognize it, I see its function, I see its limitations, I accept it with its understanding of limitations. Otherwise, I'm not generically and unanimously accepting nor rejecting. That is the proper way of observing what science is all about. I hope you understand that. So when we talk about generic terms, does Islam accept evolution? Haram or halal? Well, there's no haram or halal. To say that evolution is the mother of all, and to philosophically take a leap of faith to say, therefore there is no God, and therefore there is no need for a God because evolution is managing all of that, that to me is blind statement. That's not science. That to me is a religion. That's the definition. What is a religion? Religion is an ideology that translates into a way of life. It's a way of life that's ideologically tracked. And when I reject God, that's my religion. When I accept half a God, that's my religion. When I consider science to be my pathway, that's my religion. So religion, by definition, is a way of life with a certain set of scruples. That even an atheist has scruples. They have methods by which they derive their laws. So religion, in principle, means anybody who's intelligent and capable of articulating an idea has to have a religion. In other words, there's no human being other than a vegetable mentally who does not have a religion. That's my definition. Science is a method. Is evolution the mother of all? Absurd. Evolution is a system. That even when you have collisions, a collision is a system. When gases collide, which brings about life, it's a system. There are mechanical systems. Where did these gases come from? And gases cannot function without an environment. And what about the mathematical systems? We know by the laws of probability, when something has a probability chance, it's a product, always a product. So if it's 1 in a million, and there's another product that can happen 1 in a million, then these two must be multiplied. 1 in a million times 1 in a million. Always the case. It's a mathematical rule. No one can violate that. Now, when you multiply these probabilities by logical analysis, the numbers get smaller. So regression is part of pure chance in probabilities, meaning 1 in a million divided by 1 in a million, it's now 1 in 10 to the 12, because now the 6 zeros and the 6 zeros just got doubled. So what do you do then? The numbers get smaller. Oh, that means that pure chance is regressive, not progressive. So we've got progressive systems, we've got ideologies, we've got faith, we've got morality. These are not products of pure mechanical sciences. So no one in his proper mind can dare say that evolution as a methodology of replication and bringing about this complex multicellular human being like you and I is the only reason for our existence. It's so childish, so myopic, with due respect to those who believe in it. It is so childish, I can't believe they're getting away with it in academia. Honestly, I cannot believe it. I only think the reason they're doing this is because they don't want to get in there, because they are afraid of it. And partly I don't blame them, because people of religion who have fabricated religions, who have taken this argument of science when they were in power, they punished scientists. They used to burn them by the stakes. And they used to castigate them and destroy them and saying, you're playing with God. So yes, if science has come back with a vengeance in saying, keep religion out of science, partly I don't blame them. But historically, when the Muslims, like Ibn Sina, if you take Al-Khwarizmi, you take Jabir ibn Hayyan, these are famous fathers of science of modernity. That if Al-Khwarizmi, he's the one who came up with the idea of algorithms. All of computer worlds are algorithms, zeros and ones, constant algorithms. This is all what was established by Al-Khwarizmi. These people, when they were writing this, every other sentence had God in it. Subhanallah, look at this. They're talking about God. Take Ibn Sina, he discovered many things in science, including circulation. If you study these people, you'll find that they were always talking about Allah. How could they? Because that's the way it should be. But in the modern world today, where those who want to go into pure science and they want to negate God, where the atheistic movement is now in full force around the universities, to me, I find it is a violation of free thinking. For if you're going to limit me to question even the existence of God as a scientist, then you are a slave owner, because you have limited my capacity to question. And why should I get fired if I'm a teacher who's ever going to talk about creation and God and an intelligent designer? Why should I get fired? To me, that's a conspiracy. That to me is politics. That's not real science. Real science is give me the opportunity. Quran even says, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Say to them, bring your proof if you're truthful. Don't condemn me and damn me because I want to bring God into the picture. This is absurd. So I'm just letting you understand that there is a conspiracy out there. No doubt conspiracy. And part of the conspiracy spills into even very honest people. And part of the conspiracy is that those who have pretended to hold the rope of God's religion are abusing people and misusing it, which leads to greater atheism and agnosticism. Take a person like, for example, I'll give you a simple example. The ex-governor, as you know, Jesse Ventura, the ex-governor of Minnesota. Jesse Ventura is really a pragmatist, okay, an ex-Marine who's really seeing a lot of the wrong things that are being done in the government and in the justice system of people. He publicly states, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, I'm against religion. To me, it kills it, because as altruistic as he is, as much as he strives to uncover the truth, he kills it when he says, I don't want religion. Now why? Because he's also a victim of having seen abuse and misuse of religion, which has led him to shut off on religion. I don't blame such people sometimes. But it's our obligation to articulate it well and to expose it to them. I've had many an atheist I sit down with, and they ask me questions, and the minute I give them answers, they said, oh, I thought it was different. Oh, I thought it was like this. I said, you're comparing your religion on the basis of Christian beliefs in God. I said, please don't apply Christian ideologies to all of theistic arguments. That's just one argument. Apply a universal argument. I remember in my first debate, there was a woman who came. She said, I was a Christian. I became an atheist. But I always argued from the Christian God argument, and hence I was an atheist. But after this debate, I am going to reconsider God because I see a whole new perspective on God. See? That's the difference. Okay? And let me conclude finally, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us, how could Adam come into this picture? Let me show you a basic premise argument. That as much as science is limited to cause and effect, we do agree that initial cause, no science has been able to answer. Today, there is no science in the world that can answer the origin of life. No scientist in the world knows the origin of life. There are suggestions that it came from another planet. I said, I don't care if it came from the other side of this universe. Who cares where it came from? The question is, was it always there, or did it come out of nothing? That's the question. The human mind, notice my range in my mind is what? All of us. 0, infinity. 0, infinity. You cannot stop this. We have our two extreme boundaries, 0, infinity. That's it. And you know, in science, I remember whenever I used to study even calculus, I used to always study about this infinity. You know, Isaac Newton actually came up with the system of calculus, which is natural mathematics, which actually talks the language of the universe. And Einstein had a problem because you cannot divide a number by 0. That's an illegal function. So he used to cheat and come up with an answer. So people said, oh, your science is flawed because you're cheating. So there was a French mathematician who came up with the answer and says it's limits. Don't divide it by 0, but get to 0 infinitely. As x approaches whatever, which makes it infinitely 0. It approaches 0, but it's never 0, and that's legal. It's called limits. I said, but why do I need limits? He says, well, actually, the true language of science is infinity. I said, subhanallah, I see that now. It like clicked, like a puzzle that fell into its head. Said, wow, there it is. Subhanallah. Actually, the entire world of science is driven by infinity. Without infinity, nothing makes sense. And then I started scratching my head. I said, but you know, as important as this entity is, it's not tangible. I can't touch it. I can't measure it. I can talk about it. I can apply things towards it, but I can never feel it. Something's always approaching infinity, but never becomes infinite. Because the minute it becomes infinite, you can't talk about it. Wow. And you know, I don't want to take a blind leap of faith, because it's not. But the first thing that came to my mind, I said, this infinity in reality is Allah. Everything is approaching in infinity. And the more I studied, I noticed there's nothing in the universe, as soon as it comes out of 0, is never stopping but approaching infinity. And philosophically I said, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. I see it. I see physical entities approaching Allah forever. Wow. And it's the language of Allah that gives credence to everything. But I can never explain it. So when people ask me, give me this tangible God. If you don't have a tangible God, you're talking nonsense in your religion. I said, give me the tangible infinity, because if you're not, you're talking nonsense in science. And they back off. I said, give it to me. I want to see it. Then don't talk about it. Don't give me 13 dimensions. You can't even experiment with it. What is this conjectural science you're talking about? They said, no, that's derivative. I said, thank you, I'm deriving too. I am an evidential presuppositionalist. I am existing. I see this fantastic universe. I'm studying science. I'm seeing its incredible order. Should I not ask the question of a maker? Should I not even think about intelligence? What are you talking about? If I, as an intelligent being, dares to go on the altar of intelligence to question the integrity of my own existence, how can I not question the integrity of my maker? And they back off. And finally, I'll tell you, final point. You see, when you study the DNA, the proof of intelligence is in the DNA. Because one of the proofs of intelligence is language. See, we're intelligent beings. In fact, when they did studies on monkeys and apes, they found out how intelligent are the apes? How did we come from them? What's that missing link between us? And you find that language was a critical thing. They were trying to teach these apes, to understand language, because language was a critical point of the sign of intelligence. Now, they do have language, by the way. Even birds have language. We don't have arguments with them. But we do know that's a sign of intelligence, because one of the conditions of intelligence is language. And language is composed of encode, decode. Like I'm right now encoding. As I'm speaking to you, I'm encoding. I'm encoding words. I'm encoding gestures. I'm encoding ideas to you. And you're listening to it and you're decoding instantaneously. So we are intelligently conversing, because there's encode, decode, encode, decode. That's what life is about. I hope you understand that. DNA is precisely that. It's an encode, which then gets decoded. Intelligence. Wow. Can we deny it? No. So I hope you understand that, okay? Final point, and I promise you this is the end of the final point, is that when we say, where did Adam come into this picture? The origin can never come on its own. Thus Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that when He interjects and brings in other beings in between this flow, it's just as good as the first one. And that's the answer. By the way, when we study backwards, there's this theory called the mitochondrial Eve. I don't know if you've studied this. All human beings' mitochondria, which is the power cell of the human body, which gives us the energy to do what we're doing, the mitochondria is completely matrilineal in its genetic components. We all inherited from our mothers. All of us inherited from our mothers. So it's very easy to now remove the male species and just keep the female. And you find that they've done studies in mitochondrial Eve that the human race all aims towards one woman in Africa. Now, of course, they try to debunk it, try to crash it, they try to make it silly. Doesn't matter. Let's ask that question. Could we have evolved from a set of monkeys due to some mutation? Then where are these half-creature monkeys, half-humans? Oh, no, you can't ask questions like this. See, evolution is very protracted, long-term. I said, okay, I'm ready to listen. I got all my life. Show it to me. Oh, but it is musically, we can't. It's actually just the way it evolved. I said, look, I am genetically very different in my set of chromosomes from an ape. And even with PCR, you're able to replicate and accelerate movements forward and backwards. Where is this answer? So there are too many chunks of voids and, unanswerable questions. Science, hopefully in the future, will try to answer more and more. But there is clear evidence that even people like Brian Greene is one of the world-renowned cosmologists at Columbia University. He said there is clear evidence that as time progresses, science will be less viable, not more viable. Because the dark matter, the expansion of the universe is going to cause such dark matter that we will be less visible to be able to see science than the way we have today. So here's a scientist who's agreeing that as time progresses, we will have less knowledge. That's interesting. People say, no, science can answer everything. No, it cannot. It's a mechanical system. The answering of the question is the ethical question, not the mechanical question, which is what we're going to discuss. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. to sit? You want me to stand?
No, I'm taking the mic.
Oh. Okay, you have a question, right? Why did the laws of gravity become a discovery at the time of Isaac Newton if the sixth Imam taught these laws many years ago? Actually, there were many laws that were taught by our Imam. There were many laws that were taught by our Imams. And in fact, Jabir ibn Hayyan was a student of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. And our Imams were very, very specific on so many issues. But you've got to understand the evolution of man's intelligence over time. That our understanding of many of these fundamental sciences could not be grappled in those periods of time. And therefore, it had to be conversed. Is this working? It had to be spoken of in very, what we call, in simple systems. For example, Imam Ali alayhi salam was asked through the Prophet, how far is the sun from us? And he spoke about it in horse trots. Now, why horse trots? You don't use horse trots today. Because it's a method of measurement. It doesn't matter. Could be a flap of a wing. Who cares? As long as, because science sets its measurements relatively. I can set a foot, I can set a meter, I can set a yard. I can set anything I want, a parsec. And I set that and that becomes a measuring tool. Imam Ali alayhi salam uses the tool of the horse trot because people rode horses at that time. But now, should they have gone deep into answering all the scientific questions? No. In fact, it was strategic for them not to mention it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that when it comes to methodical systems of exposure in science, the human race already has that ability. In fact, at the University of Colorado, when I was having a debate with an atheist who was a mathematician, who was a logician doing his PhD, he asked me that question. He said, why has your book not got all the answers to all the scientific discoveries if this is the book of God? Excellent question. I said, God is very pragmatic with us. And He has already endowed us with the ability to expose natural laws. And we can ascertain them on our own. Hence, it would be redundant for God to tell me that which I can confirm myself. But where we lack is the ability to understand moral principles. For there is nowhere in the universe you and I can search for moral arguments of do's and don'ts and haram and halal. Therefore, Allah gives us to that. He looked at me and says, very interesting. It makes sense. Because at the end of the day, no science in the world can compete at the moral level. So Allah tells me in the Quran all the do's and don'ts of halal and haram, which no science can tell me. By the way, there is no morality in pure science. FYI. Anybody asks you, tell them, show me what is evil and good in science. There's no such thing. There's no good chemistry and evil chemistry. There's no good biology and evil biology. There's no such system. So notice that there is no morality in science. But at the end of the day, it's about morality that's at question, not about my scientific prowess and my ability to know the universe. Heck, if I know that, I can answer many questions. I can build aircrafts and I can do all kinds of things, but that doesn't make me a good person. If I know how to turn on switches and change the direction of universes, that doesn't make me a great person, because if I'm morally bankrupt, I'm still a bad person. So notice, the bottom line is ethics, ethics, ethics. And that only Allah can teach us. Hence the necessity of religion, hence the necessity of God. I hope I'm making sense. Are miracles within the bounds of physics, or is it brought about humanity abnormally or without obeying the physical laws? That's an excellent question. In my opinion, from the way I understand it, miracles do not violate the scientific principles of laws. They don't. Miracles follow the physical systems. The difference is, in miracles, when something happens, it's because we don't know how it happened. Hence, it's become a miracle. Because by definition, a miracle is that which cannot be explained. But tomorrow, when something can be explained, it's no longer a miracle. It becomes a standardized thing. But don't we all agree that the birth of a child is a miracle? Now, a person can tell me with graphic details how a baby is formed, from the sperm to the egg. Does it cease to be a miracle? No, it's still a miracle. So notice that even my knowledge of it does not negate the power of miracles. But miracles typically are that which cannot be explained. So by simple answers, miracles do follow the the general physical laws of God. Like, for example, the Messenger of Allah traveling to Mi'raj. Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa alladhi barakna hawlahu linuriyahu min ayatina, right? The Messenger traveled all in one night, went to the furthest heavens, Qaba Qawsaini aw adna, that even Jibreel could not reach that high stage. And yet he arrived, the Prophet came back within a flash of an eye. Some say, oh, he went in spiritually, or he didn't go physically. It doesn't matter. The point is, he traveled and he went. And by all physical understandings of Einstein's law of relativity and macro physics as we talk about it, it's not possible for a human being to travel at the speed of light. It's impossible. And even if you travel at the speed of light, you cannot cross these dimensions that fast. It's impossible. So then how did he do it? There's plenty of scientific studies today to show that there are wormholes, there are warp elements in the universe that enables us to get into another dimension and travel to the other side of the universe in seconds. That's theoretically possible today. See, the power of science coming in and says it is possible. And Allah only knows how the messenger actually traversed with Jibreel and went to the furthest heavens. Is it impossible? No. Is it explainable? No. Therefore, is it a miracle? Yes. But is it within the prescription of God's physics? Yes. When discussing the infallibility of our prophets with atheists, how should Muslims justify the original sin of Adam? Okay, number one, according to Islamic principles, Adam did not commit an original sin. This concept is a Judeo-Christian idea, particularly Christians who have really capitalized on it in order to validate the redemption, what we call vicarious atonement through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. Please understand that. This is an idea that was created by Paul. It's a Pauline concept of Jesus dying on the cross for the sin of man. In John 3:16, they say, for God so loved the world, he gave his only son, quote unquote, begotten son. This concept is not in Islam. Now, there are Muslims who believe that Adam did make the first mistake, therefore God threw him out of the garden. Look, we understand this very, very clearly that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, decreed Adam to be on earth. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Adam was decreed to come on earth before he even existed. So this conclusion that therefore Adam sinned by disobeying Allah and therefore he was thrown out of this garden to come on earth would be a violation of God's decree, because Allah had already decreed him to come to earth. And if Adam did not come to earth, then it would be a violation of Allah's decree, which is impossible. So it's not a sin. And I've had this discussion. Allama Tabatabai goes very eloquently and elegantly into this argument. And it's sad that still within a Muslim world, we still hold on to say, well, prophets do sometimes, tarke awla, they take the lesser of the two goods. Please be very, very careful what we say. That whole concept and concoction in our minds is a deadly poison, because the minute that's capable, we start to throw all kinds of trash on the prophets, which then what it does is it blurs these role models. Now you might say, of course, to err is human. Prophets are humans, they make mistakes. Not in the message, nor do they make mistakes. Allah protects them specifically, specially. I told you in my presentation before, even in the Quran, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even Iblis himself says, I cannot touch your purified ones. إِلَّا عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. Your purified ones, I cannot touch them. Allah says, that is correct, that is my way. You cannot even, you have no authority on my chosen ones. No authority. So then, what is Allah talking about authority? It's to be taken astray. Can prophets go astray? No, they don't. People say, oh, but then that's like God. Please, don't compare perfection with divinity, please. So you tell me when a student goes to an exam and gets 100, he becomes godly? When you do something perfectly, did you become godly? Did you become divine? What analogy is this? That if a prophet does something perfect, he becomes godlike? What analogy is this? This is not an analogy. This is a foolish analogy. Perfection does not imply divinity. Please understand that. Okay? So, there's no original sin in Islam. According to our school of thought, Adam did not make a mistake. Adam was advised not to approach the tree because he was being warned of what lies ahead in his trial for why he was created. And when Adam seeks forgiveness, it's not because he made a mistake. Because the rule in the Quran is when prophets ask for forgiveness, it's because they are prophets of God and they recognize Allah. That's the reason they ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you made a mistake. Forgiveness means seeking protection. Ghafara has many meanings in the Quran. Ghafara means protection, not seeking forgiveness only. But I would ask you a basic question. I'd like any Muslim in the world to kindly give me one verse, just one, where a prophet, any prophet in the Quran seeks forgiveness from another human being. I'd like to hear that. People say the Prophet frowned and turned away from a blind man, right? Abdullah ibn Maktoum. Okay, then he is due an apology. Did he? Of course not. The Prophet is the type that will turn into a blind man and think, oh, this rich man is more important than a poor man. You think this is our Prophet? When in Mecca the Prophet says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the Prophet, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. He's of the highest moral conduct. So now you have a problem. Because Allah is saying the Prophet has the highest moral conduct, and then he frowns and turns his face away from a poor man? This is nonsense. It's not the Holy Prophet. It's somebody else who's frowning and turning away. But let's go forward on that argument. Assuming he did that, which he did not, should he not ask for forgiveness? Since the Quran is my book of morals, show me how a prophet asks for forgiveness from another human being. There's not a single verse where a prophet ever asked for forgiveness. Even when Musa alayhi salam was with Khidr, and Khidr says, لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَيَّ صَبْرًا. Did I not tell you you will not have patience with me by what I'm doing? Musa doesn't say, oh, I'm sorry, ask for forgiveness. I'm sorry, Khidr. Sorry, I didn't mean to. No, Musa says, don't taunt me. Don't hold me liable. Why is Musa saying that? Because prophets don't make mistakes. Look, I ask all of you, think about it, go home, send me an email. Find me one verse where a prophet asks for forgiveness. Because it's logical. If a prophet does and make mistakes, then there has to be at least one verse in the Quran where a prophet is asking for forgiveness from another human being. Because that's the akhlaq of a believer, isn't it? If I make mistake with you, it's hukukun nas, I need your forgiveness. Show me one. Nowhere. But yet prophets are always asking for forgiveness from Allah. Why? Because they know Allah is so great that no matter what they do, they're nothing. So therefore, the only object of talking to Allah is ظَلَمْتُ نَفْسِي رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. That's the difference between a prophet and an Iblis. Iblis refuses to ask for forgiveness. That's why he's so damned and doomed. Do you think that even an atheist can go? Can an atheist go to paradise even though they do not believe in Allah? It's possible. Yes, it is possible. The condition is they must be struggling to search the truth. That while in their struggles they die, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best. No one knows who will enter paradise. But the Quran mentions that ones who struggle, mustad'afeen, when the angels will ask them, why are you in this state? Wasn't the world wide enough for you to migrate if you were so oppressed? That's why hijrah is so important. That if our religion is going to be lost in Canada, guaranteed, then it's wajib to leave. You must leave. That's the rule. So the angels are asking in the Quran to those who are going to be flung in hell for the moment, that, oh, we were oppressed. The angels would say, wasn't the world wide enough for you to migrate? What stopped you? So notice the principles in the Quran. Anybody has the potential of entering paradise. The condition is struggle. Ya ayyuhal insan innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadhan famulaki. O mankind, keep struggling until you meet your Lord. That's what mankind is all about. How do you dispute finding pre-Homo sapiens skeletons such as Neanderthals? Neanderthals, there are creatures who do resemble humans. There is no doubt. Our Imam, our Holy Prophet was asked that question. He answered, he says, yeah, there are many creatures who resemble us. There are predecessors in the flesh. They appear like us. Their levels of intelligence are different. There's nothing wrong with that. By the way, the interesting thing is that the oldest fossils are humans, not ape fossils. Now, if we preceded from them, then shouldn't they be the more accessible? Study the complexity of science. You'll see even retroviruses, which causes the HIV, HIV virus, which causes the AIDS problem. You find it's a very complicated system, yet it's so elegant and simple. It goes RNA, DNA, back to RNA to protein. It's very complicated. To reverse, it's called reverse transcriptase. It goes backwards and then forward. Wow, it's very sophisticated. So who talks about sophistication even at these very sub-levels? It's complicated. Scientists cannot lay it in a linear system that a prokaryote is less sophisticated from a eukaryote, which is multicellular. These are comments being made, which in the world of science, you cannot really truly talk about them. These are more what we call values that we placed. In pure science, you cannot place such values. You cannot. You just have to observe and you talk. You talk what you see, don't put any values in it. If you do, you become a philosopher. If God is just, why does he choose where we end up? And if he doesn't, then how is he all-knowing? Allah is all-knowing 100%, because for many reasons. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is it's complete. Our knowledge is subject to time. Time is an element that controls the quantity and quality of our knowledge. Allah is not bound in time. He has no time. He created time. So his knowledge is not bound in time. So for me to say, how does God know the future? It's actually a question outside the parameters of God, because Allah has no future. Allahu, la ilaha illahu. Imam Ali alayhi salam explains it. He said, don't put God in the spectrum of time. God is beyond time. Don't put him in the spectrum of time like you and me. How does he know the future? God is instantaneous. His knowledge is beyond instantaneous. Even the word instantaneous is a time word. Please don't forget that. Where, how, when, these are time sentences. We as a human race cannot escape it, because the time space continuum that you and I are built on, time, matter, space, we can't escape it. Our language is built around it. Our concepts are built around it. Our understanding is built around it. Hence, we tend to put God into the same questions. This is why idolatry is so prevalent, because we want to make him into some physical, tangible being, into space forms, because that's the only way I can think. And Allah says, don't do that. So his knowledge is infinite, is absolute, and therefore that's a condition. Now, does he know where we will end up even before we exist? Yes, at all times. Even that's an absurd sentence. Notice, at all times. It's a time word. So, please understand that while Allah is all-knowing, we may ask the question, well, since God knows where I'm going to be, why did he create me on this earth? Knowing something does not imply interjecting in it. Please understand that. I can know that it's going to rain tonight because my meteorologist, or I studied meteorology, and I looked at the physical world of sciences, and I know that when there's a certain amount of pressure in the air, when there's a certain amount of cumulus clouds in the air, and such and such and such, that yes, I can conclude that there is a high chance of rain falling in this place, meaning there's X amount percentage. That doesn't mean I brought the rain. Knowledge does not imply interjection of it. Please understand that. So Allah's knowledge does not imply interjection of it. Allah's knowledge is complete, but interjection at this level is impossible. And I'll give you simple arguments, and then I won't go too deep into it. I know some of you have raised your hands. You may want to ask a question, but we'll try as quickly as possible to answer this. For example, I give you an example of, interjection. As believers in God, do we believe that Allah has an evil side to him? We as Muslims categorically say no. We're not dualists. We're not Parsis. We don't believe in dual God. Ahura Mazda and Zarathustra, right? We don't believe in those ideas, the good God and the bad God. We believe in an absolutely good God. Everything God does is good. We all agree? Okay, let's say for argument's sake we agree. Does evil exist? Yes, it does. Do people do wrong things? Absolutely. Of course they do. I said, then who's doing it? Because if God is doing everything, then how can he do anything evil? SubhanAllah. So whatever evil is being performed is not God, because God would never do that. That means that must be the power of free will. There's no other way to answer that. So, a simple answer to this, that Allah's knowledge does not imply he interjected in it, but he knows our choices. He knows the essence of our choices, and that does not negate my liability in my choices. What statistical or mathematical evidence can I provide to an atheist to convince them of God's existence? Mathematical, if you want to use it, first of all, Roger Penrose, world-renowned mathematician, says the probability of the universe coming into existence by pure chance is 0. That's from a mathematical expert. There are many mathematicians like that. There are those who've tried to postulate the idea that there is a possibility. Okay. But it is so negligent, which by the way is impossible, but even if we take this blind leap of faith, it's absurd. No human being ever takes a step knowing that the probability is 1/1,000,000,000th of a percent that this floor can collapse. Therefore, I'm not going to walk on it. You don't do that. Okay? So that's one. The evidence from its basic observation, as we say, from deductive logic is, I cannot exist without a predecessor. And this is what Bertrand Russell was asking, that since God created us, who created God? And if the argument goes forward and say there was a God who created this God, then I cannot stop. I have to go to infinity. And if I go to infinity, which I must, then no God can exist, and I cannot exist, because there's an infinity of regression. And that's impossible. So by mathematical, logical conclusions, whatever created me was not waiting for a predecessor. And that has to be the ever-living, omnipotent, all-present being. Otherwise, this argument is completely nonsensical. And no one can poke a hole in this argument. It's something rational, a fitrah, that just sits in our hearts and we just know it. And there's just no way to cancel this. That's why Allah says, we are closer to you than a jugular vein. Are atheists considered impure, just the way mushriks are considered najis to touch? This is a fiqhi question. It's a question of fiqh. There are ulama or fuqaha who consider atheists and mushrikeen to be not najis in touch. They are very firm in it, and they believe they're not impure in touch. No person is impure in touch. Impurity is only impure when there's an impure substance in between you and the person. So if a person is, working in the sewer system and he's got all kinds of human excrement on his body, then this person is najis. If he just urinated or this person just urinated, well, the urine has made the person najis. But are they physically najis even if they take a shower? No. Some fuqaha said no. Some of our ulama do ihtiyat, which means they are precautionary and they take the position of precaution to say we are not sure, therefore we consider them unclean. But many of the fuqaha that I met personally when I was in the Islamic Republic, I personally went one after the other. I said, your position on this najasa issue, is this a hukm or is this ihtiyat? They said ihtiyat. Ihtiyat means precautionary. And when a marja passes a ruling on the basis of ihtiyat, he's giving you permission to follow somebody who has passed a ruling on it, meaning there's ruju, giving you permission to pass a judgment using somebody else's judgment. And therefore there are fuqaha and ulama today who have not ihtiyat judgments, but clear judgments that the atheists and the Hindus and the mushrikeen are not najis in touch. Okay? If you believe that I still consider them to be najis, then stick with it and follow it. Because ihtiyat, there's nothing wrong with ihtiyat. Ihtiyat means precautionary. I'd rather avoid. No problem. When I asked Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi this question personally, I asked him this question. He says, they're not najis. I said, would you eat their food? He says, I'm in Iran. I'm in Qom, among Muslimin. Muslim food is accessible. Why would I? He said, but if I am confronted and I am invited and a halal entity is given to me by a mushrik, it's not najis. He says, but take the consideration of people living in India among the Hindus. How do they interact? They're surrounded by Hindus. Take the Holy Prophet in Mecca. He was surrounded by mushrikeen. How did he interact with them? He says, by those standards we understand it's not this position. Okay. What is this? Tail art. I don't know what tail art is. Anybody have a final question before we end this? I see anybody raise their hands? No? Okay. Yes, brother. How do you deal with? How do you deal with religious racism? Education. Educate. They say if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Very expensive. Educate them. When you have somebody who's ignorant, ask them basic questions. If you find somebody very, very anti-you, avoid them. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. Walk away from them. Say thank you, bye. Don't interact with them. If somebody really has hatred, avoid them. But the best thing to do before you avoid them, smile at them and give them a nice comment. As our sixth Imam said, punish a man who is rude and harsh with you by being kind to them. Punish them. What's the relation between the mention of human beings transformed into various animals? Quran talks about kunu, kiratatan khasi'in, meaning to convert, make them into pigs and apes. And did they physically turn? Allahu alam, possibly they did. Can Allah turn a person into qualities of being a pig or an ape? Possible. Humans can, just by our behavior. We can act very stupid for the moment. We can look very animal-like. It depends on how we behave. Does a person physically become a pig and start snorting and he's got a curled tail? Allahu alam, I don't know. I can't answer that. When the Quran says turn into pigs and apes, the implication is you are so low that you are like them. Did they physically become? I've read hadith that yes. It doesn't matter. The point is, if it happened, I have not read much on the actual essence of them turning. Some have argued, that's probably the answer to evolution right there. I think that's a bit far-fetched. David Hume argued that we cannot base faith on miracles. How do we view this argument? We cannot base faith on miracles. Well, David Hume's argument was that there is no God and that we experience our moral system based on trial and error. And we deduce our understanding on the basis of what we understand. David Hume's argument were smashed by Shahid Baqir Sadr. They were smashed by Shahid Mutahari. That David Hume was pulverized by his very arguments. And it was really, if you study his writings, like Shahid Baqir Sadr asked him the question, if you can deduce, then when a man holds a pen and is writing, by what logical conclusion can you deduce that did the pen cause my hand to move or did my hand cause my pen to move? You can't. It's impossible. And David Hume's argument is that a computer existed with no operating system, and then over time, the computer, through its own observations, evolved and developed its own operating system. This is totality of absurdity. It's a nice try, but our great scholars have canceled this. So David Hume's argument of miracles as a means of faith, I don't see a problem with it. In fact, David Hume had a problem with faith. So let's understand what is faith. Faith-based systems, which means giving what we call inductive arguments, where I'm going to project the future based on my past experience, is perfectly human in nature. Even people like David Hume must have practiced it because, for example, I'm a human being and I hire somebody. This person comes to work in my company. I don't know how well this person works. He's given me his resume, and I believe he's a good employee that is. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give him the keys of the entire office and the whole business the first day? No, logically you would never do that. What would you do? You test them out. Why would you test them out? Because on the basis of the transactions and over time, you'll be able to conclude that there is some worthiness in this individual. There comes a time when an individual has to have trust in that individual's ability, hence you give them more authority with the hope that they will perform well based on past experiences. This is normal human behavior. I will say that statement and that movement is faith, because I have faith in the person. I gave him the keys to my office. But how do you know he won't rob you? Well, I have faith in him from the point of view that past experiences have shown me that this man has been consistently good, and therefore my trust in this individual, that my future projections are going to be a positive one. When I believe in God and I have faith in so many things, it's because I've validated so many arguments as my foot ground, my foundation of standing, that now my leap is validated. Hence, faith-based systems on logical arguments is the proper way to have faith. But faith-based systems with illogical arguments is a foolish, blind belief system. This is the difference between Islam and all logical. If you look at all logical arguments, and you study them all, you find Islam is the only one that trumps that on the belief of God, on the belief of prophets, on the belief of Day of Judgment, on the belief of scriptures. You find the foundation of Islam is the only one that a person can take a leap from. Everything else, to me, the way I see it, is what we call quicksand. Teleportation. Can it be explained physically, or is it purely metaphysical? Look, what is metaphysical? Metaphysical is that which is beyond measurable physical. It's still physical, don't forget that, please. Metaphysical, like my spirit, is metaphysical. It cannot be measured generally in the physical sense, but it's still physical. Please understand that. Physicality is still there, but it's in a different dimension. Okay? So, can it be transported? Can the physical state, which my body it can, both are possible. Proof is in the Quran. The throne of Bilqis was very far from Sulaiman. Very far. It came with a flash of an eye. That's in the Quran. Quran doesn't lie. So how did the throne come? You see, that's the question. And the Quran is basically saying it's possible. By the way, you want to go study the story of Sulaiman, don't forget that bird, hoopoe, spoke. And the bird knew God. Because when the bird observed the woman, Bilqis, worshipping the sun, the bird told Sulaiman, I saw a woman, a great woman, worshipping the sun. That's a very intelligent creature. In fact, today you send spy planes and you send these, unmanned vehicles, drones. The drone can't tell you anything. It can just show you. This one was better than a drone. It was describing everything, including Tawheed. You want to talk about reconnaissance? Sulaiman had it much ahead than we did. See? So we would talk about, do birds talk? Do they understand? Quran says, yeah. They do. They just can't talk to you. But if Allah wants to turn it on, like Sulaiman, He did. He told him. And then Sulaiman brings the throne. You realize the event of Sulaiman was future science. Teleportation. A house floor made of glass. Wow. Who can build a house today made of glass? You know how difficult it is to do that? Span it. Water running underneath it. How did Sulaiman do it? Maybe today we got machines to do it. How did he do it? I should think about that. If everything is created from something, what was God created from? Notice the question from. The question implies God did not exist before. So the Holy Prophet used to answer this question, tell me when God did not exist so I can tell you when He came. Tell me what He's made up of so I can tell you what He's not made up of. So the question is, what is God created from? He is the creator of everything. We cannot describe what He's made of or from. God is the creator and cannot be explained. No being sensible in his mind can ever describe the nature of God's existence. We can describe His essence. We cannot describe His physical presence. It's impossible, beyond the scope of our discussion. So what is Allah made up of? Nothing makes Him. He makes everything. That everything is a created entity. The Creator is not in need of anything. He's independent of everything. And many times we have a problem with that because now we try to physically place God. But remember, God has no frames, no references, no bodies the way we think it is. And that's where we have a problem. We say, well, if He doesn't, then how do I conceptualize Him? Conceptualize and understand Him through His creation. Just like the Holy Prophet and the Imam said, we do not worship a God that we do not see. And everything around us is the presence of God through His creation. And hence the Prophet said, Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabba. When you know yourself, you will know your Lord. This is how Allah is described. And let's leave it at that. Some hands. Yes, brother. Well, these are Newton's laws of thermodynamics you're talking about, right? If every action requires an equal. This is the equilibrium system in the physical world. Just like matter cannot be created nor destroyed. In the physical universe that we know of, yes. But not when you look at quantum physics, for example, some of these rules do not apply. That's just one dimension of science. So when it comes to my transaction, it's not applicable. For example, you and I can commit sins, and one good sin can wipe out many bad sins. Allah says, "Innal hasanat yudhibna sayyi'at," plural, many sins, right? So this equal and counteraction is very relativistic. In terms of judgment of actions, we cannot apply that. One good deed could cancel many bad deeds. And sadly, one bad deed can cancel many good deeds. Okay? Final. Right. The multiverse argument, where they say that there are many singularities, and based on laws of probability, this one came up as what we call the perfect universe, right? Because it's got the ability to sustain life. Brian Greene talks about that in his arguments because he's a proponent of the multi-universe system. I don't have any problems with that. The still question is, the container that contains all these singularities, were they always there? And why this one can sustain life? What about the rest? And where did they come from? And why did they decide to sustain life? And why is perfection so necessary for it to sustain life? See, these are ethical questions no scientist will dare get into, because he knows he's back to square one. I said, give me infinite universes. What difference does it make? Unless you're willing to agree that these universes have always existed, by laws of thermodynamics and science, we know that everything is a finite entity, has a moment of time. Everything. And no scientist in the world will tell you that time is an infinite entity. It's a finite entity. If it was infinite, you and I could not divide it. We divide time all the time. All the time. So it's finite. By logical deduction, anything that's finite has to have an origin. It had a moment. When it started, well, then it's not eternal. If it's not eternal, because no finite entity can exist in the realm of the infinite infinitely. Impossible. In fact, it's a contradiction. So when we see infinite, when objects approach infinity, it's a finite entity displaying a quality towards infinity. But nothing in science is infinite. There's only one absolute unique infinity in the world of science, even in the world of ideologies. So when we understand this, we know time had an origin. Therefore, we know this universe had a start. The universes had a start. And it still brings us back to the original question. How can nothing come from nothing with nothing by nothing? You get it? How can something, comes from nothing by nothing with nothing? Whatever has made it has always been. That's the logical argument. Even scientists agree that something always had to be there for all of this to happen. So the multiverse argument, even if we go in there, this was my argument with Carrier, because he was arguing with Corey on this issue in the second debate. And I jumped in and I said, what's the difference? You're trying to put wool over, you're putting wool over our eyes. What's the difference? I'm not arguing against the multiverse system. This is a scientific talk. Doesn't matter. It's still begging the question, where did the multiverse system come in? That's the philosophical argument we're having today. We're not going to dissect all of science today and tell you how the universe is functioning. I don't care. I want to know, how did this multi-universe system originate? Are you assuming it was always there? Please prove your point. And Carrier moved away from it. I said, prove it. That's the whole argument about God. That from nothing comes nothing. We are something. Whether it's multi or universe or single universe, I don't care. It's still something, and I want to know, where did it come from. This is so rudimentary as a question. It's so elementary as a question that people scratch their heads and they think, no, there's got to be something more to it. There's nothing more to it. That's the elegance of belief in Allah. That's the elegance of Islam, is that the belief in God is so simple that many a times we're stumped by it. It's too simple, we say. No, it's too simple. It's got to be more complicated. I'm saying to us, it's not complicated. The belief in Allah is too simple. Let's leave it there. There's no need to go further. But if you want to go further, brace yourself and get into the world of science and argue about every possible parameter. Trust me, you will see that it comes back to the same argument over and over and over. Done this, been there. I'm telling you, I'm not saying it with confidence that I want to sound like I'm being, egotistic or cocky in any way. I'm saying it sincerely. Sincerely, I say to us all, that it's a lot of rhetoric with very little substance when it comes to these possibilities. But in the world of science, when people make these possibilities, I laud them for it. I said, thank you, because we have to entertain them. Maybe there is a looming hole out there that needs to be answered. But every hole, every potential question that has always come back to its original answer, which is where the elegance of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. It's so simple and sublime and powerful that I'm telling you, in my years, being even in universities, in the Department of Sciences, sitting with scientists and experts in math and in physics and in all the areas, I said, please explain to me. I do not want to belittle you. Please tell me, what are your limitations? Where do you go? Because I want to understand who you are. Maybe you've got an answer for me. I haven't got one yet. Not by their answers. There's only one answer. This is why there's that passion in that. It's impossible any other way. And I'm not talking about one element. I'm talking about collection of every angle. I'm talking about a three-dimensional universe. Remember, please, even when you study cosmology, the expansion of the universe is not linear. It's three-dimensional. It's happening at every corner, every angle. There's an equidistant expansion from every angle. This is fascinating. This is incredible. Usually when you expand something, you go on one dimension, in a three-dimensional world. You're talking about a dimension that's in 3D, where the expansion of all the stars, for example, are moving away from each other equidistant. So when I see that, I say, when I'm going to make my judgment on Iman and belief, I have to look at it multidimensional. My actions, my transactions, my humanity, my flesh, my thoughts, my ideas have to be taken into all these considerations. And it's very simple, impossible that I'm existing here as an accident. It is impossible. Impossible, capital I. I'm not saying it to impress you, please, brothers and sisters. Honestly, Allah is my witness. I say it with understanding of all my years, in my limited knowledge. It's impossible. Shall we end?
People are asking to clarify whether we're allowed to eat Hindu food or not.
Okay, the question is about eating Hindu food. I asked Ayatollah Nassim Makarian this question. He said, it's good, you should avoid it. Don't eat it. I asked him this question too. He said, not because it is najis. It's because when you have the kuffar and they do not know the law and the sharia, they will add things that are haram. How can you guarantee it? So I went further and I said, what if I can guarantee it is halal? He says, can you try that? It's very difficult. How are you going to try that? He's right. So, ihtiyat, avoid it. But take the scenario where a Hindu invites you, and Hindus are God-loving people. They're not bad people. They're not dirty. They're good people. But let's say they invite you, and a Hindu offers you water, bottled water. Can you drink it? Yes. No problem. Do I go to a Hindu restaurant and eat bel puri and all that stuff? Avoid it. You've got Muslim restaurants. Be among the believers. The halal factor is extremely important. Why did the Quran say that? وَقُلُوا مِمَّا ذُكِّرَ اسْمُ اللَّهِ. Eat that which Allah's name is mentioned. Why? Because it has an effect. Food is very, very impactful on our iman. Please, don't just be free. I'll go to McDonald's, I'll say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, it will become halal. No. No, it's not that simple. You cannot do that. Be careful. In fact, I believe you should be so careful that you should only eat chickens also that are not injected with hormones. Not because it's haram, it's harmful. You know, mad cow disease that started in Europe and in China, with this, the virus that started in China. You know why it started? because they're manipulating the animals. They have cows now. You know, Monsanto is actually going into the stomach of the cow and changing their chemistry and feeding them corn. Cows are not designed to eat corn. It's the only way to make them fat. If you ever watch Food Inc., chickens are so big they can't walk. They die. Yeah, because their legs can't hold it. This is dhulm. This is haram. And then the same chicken now is slaughtered because it's good for the weight. You see, it makes us more money. And then people eat this. You see these huge chicken pieces, you know. You know this is a hormone-fed creature. Avoid it. The after effects of genetically modified and manipulated foods can be extremely dangerous for us. It causes diseases that will show up many years later. You won't be able to turn it off. Be careful with that. Chickens that are small in size, you'll see they're very small. You know this is grain-fed. Go to the grain-fed ones. Make sure they're slaughtered in the halal way. There's a lot of research to show that animals who are slaughtered in a halal way have no pain. There is, in fact, a beautiful video in Texas, in what is the town called? Which town? Yeah, it's called the Merciful Slaughterhouse. These are Muslims, mashallah, some of them are reverts, and they took the verse of the Quran, and all their animals are free to roam. This is in Texas, very close by Houston. And they take their animals, they treat them well, and when they bring the animal, they never bring them two together. They bring one, they sit with the animal, they caress, and then they say in the ear, Bismillah Allahu Akbar, Bismillah Allahu Akbar. And they recite the ayah of the Quran, and the animal just goes to sleep. And they remain there, they don't move. He says, look how, he says, if this animal is disturbed, we send it back, we don't slaughter it. He says, and we've done studies that when you slice its jugular, he says the pressure of the blood in the body is what keeps the animal, just like the human being. If a person's jugular is cut, the pressure is released. When the pressure is released, the brainstem drops. When the brainstem drops, it shuts off your nervous system. This is why you see a white flashing light. They say when you deprive your brain of oxygen, you see a bright white light. This is why people who've had near-death experiences have always had this experience of seeing a bright white light before their death. So when you slaughter an animal and the blood gushes out, its pressure changes and it no longer feels any pain. Now, if an animal has been killed that way, and therefore it is now halal for me to eat because I've taken a life by the permission of God, and I've done it properly, there's rahmah in it. And you might say, what's the physical, biological benefit? I said there is a spiritual benefit to it. That you approached an animal mercifully by the command of God. Isn't that important? Well, you know, we're all mechanical beings, you know. We're just chemical, carbon-based computers anyway. So what difference does it make? We chop them up, we mix them all up, and we make them into all these kinds of food. I said, well, then let's all be mechanical and chop each other up too. No, there's ethical reasons. So please, try your best to eat halal food. I know the value of that in my house, and I thank my mother especially, my father too, but very strict with that. I never realized it. The healthiness of eating that food is unbelievable. At the camp, all our kids who come to our camp, my mother vociferously refuses to have any meat served that is not hand-fed, grain-fed, in other words, no injections, nothing, you know, and hand-slaughtered chickens, for example, and beef. And many a times my workers, who are local Americans, when they come and join us for food, they say, we've never tasted a chicken like this in our lives. There's something unique about this chicken. What is it? I said, you taste the difference? He said, oh, 100% difference. This is the best chicken I've ever tasted in my life. And I have so many of my American friends at the camp who ask us to bring the chicken for them, and they buy it from us because they love it. Now, it's just a taste issue here for them. But the halal issue, the purity issue, right? Please try your best to do that as best as possible. And please don't go to these McDonald's, and these are poisonous facilities. Believe me, I'm not denigrating it or bashing it. These institutions are the most unhealthy facilities on earth. Supersize Me, watch that one, you'll know what I mean by that. Okay? It's designed, you know, McDonald's is designed for who? The poor people. Kills them fast. In fact, if you study John Perkins, he says the externalities of Warren Buffett's ownership of McDonald's which causes millions of people to end up in the hospital due to cardiac arrests, is not factored into McDonald's profits. Somebody's paying for that. Be healthy. Stop smoking. Stop smoking nargile. Stop smoking, please. Yeah, I know people will attack me and take a gun out right now. Oh, brothers, we don't like you anymore. I don't care if you like me or not. I'm giving you sincere advice. Stop it, please. I'm not denigrating anybody. Please, healthy lifestyles, please. Healthy, live healthy, eat healthy food. This is the beauty of this world. Make yourself live the longest. Be productive. Look good. Be vibrant. Live to 110 years of age, but be independent and healthy. That's maximizing the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's end with a dua, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma kun li waliyika al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. Salawatuka alayhi wa ala abai. Fi hadhihi as-sa'ati wa fi kulli sa'a. وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة وآخر الدعوة أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم.